it's Megan. Thanks for joining me again for Snack Break with Meg. I'm really excited because today we're talking about something that is not only unusual, but also has a lot of criticism. The church at one point in time even tried to ban this item, and it's something that I can promise you and me both use every day. Wait, let me get one for you. Today we're talking about forks and why they're offensive. Okay, so something to note about this Snack Break episode is I've already done a podcast version of it a while ago, but now I'm doing a video version of it because I think the story is just too good to not do a video version of it. Plus, it's a story that I feel like when I did it on the podcast side, I had kind of a janky setup, so I like to be able to rewrite this in a way, I guess. But if you like shows that are kind of just a little bit more to the point and factual, go to that episode. This is a lot more creative. This has a lot more of a Meg flair on it and a Snack Break flair. And what better place to do it than in my kitchen? My fridge is not, I'm not even going to play with y'all. My fridge is not like, if anyone comes at me and says, Meg, your fridge looks dirty as fuck, I'm gone. I don't care. I'm doing the best I can. And I just feel like this is a comfy place. I'm a floor sitter. That's just part of the gig, unfortunately. But today we're talking about offensive forks. And as the story goes, basically there was a Roman emperor, Otto II. He married a woman. Her name is very difficult to pronounce. I'll put it on the screen, okay? That's going to be as good as we can get right now. The merchants introduced this tool, the fork. They introduced it to the Romans, and it started getting traded around by merchants everywhere. So these merchants were trading it around all different parts of Italy, and they were basically saying, you pair the fork with the knife, and that's how we're gonna start eating now. Isn't this amazing? And the Roman Empire's wife, the Empress, she was known for using a golden fork, which is really cool because if you're gonna eat and you are the Empress of all of Rome, you might as well have a golden fork, right? I like to think about this like, okay, way back in the day in history, the Roman Empire in all their fame and glory, kind of like the Kardashians now. They're famous. Everyone knows about them. And if you're famous, you can't just use a regular fork. Just like the Kardashians can't just have a regular kid birthday party. It has to be over the top, you know? They have a Candyland themed birthday party and Kourtney Kardashian doesn't want candy there. It doesn't make sense to us, but hey, who are we to set the rules? They're royalty, I guess. So the golden fork was the standard for this empress. So the Romans started trying to make this a trend. Basically, they're like, hey, our empress, she freaking loves the fork. It's the shit. And then, of course, the British are like, whoa. We're not gonna be on par with this. We can't let the Romans start a trend. So instead, they started basically shit-talking the Romans by saying, a fork is a feminine affection of Italians. Like, they're just so feminine. They're just so, We're over here with our tea and crumpets every single day, like clockwork. We are superior to them. So, back in the day, this was just kind of something that was like, the British were talking poorly about the Romans for using a fork. But I mean, British people, they eat beans on toast. So I'm saying I don't think you're one to judge, but that was just the way of the world. But then things started getting a little crazier in Forklandia, basically. So people started saying like, well, God gave us natural forks or fingers. A lot of people at that time, especially people that would be, well, like you and me, peasants of the world, they were eating with their hands. They would just grab, fistfuls of food and just eat it, the bread. I don't know how they made tea. They must have been stirring. Spoons were allowed during this time, so you would think that would be like a natural thing. Like, oh, well, God gave us natural spoons or mouths, so why are we using a spoon? Couldn't tell you why. The spoon was accepted, the fork was not. And so it was this whole conspiracy that was thought up that basically forks were unholy. God gave you your fingers to eat and use as forks, so you need to do that. And then ultimately what happened was people started getting very, very confused. Nobody in the peasant level, our level of the hierarchy in the world, nobody wanted to be the person to be insulting to God. And this is the basically the thought behind it. They started stirring up this conspiracy around forks. Yes, we're still talking about forks. And then it turned into this whole thing where when it goes down the level, like, we don't like the Romans because, they're kind of cooler than us. They're winning a bunch of wars. So we're going to talk shit on their forks. And then it started, oh, well, it's unholy, whatever. You're insulting God. By the time it gets down to, the peasants of the world, just trying to live their lives with their couple pieces of bread a day, like, it turns into this thing where it's like, what do we do? What do we do? We don't want to insult the church. We definitely don't want to insult God because we still want our crops to get watered. And, what do? You either use a fork or you end up in a drought. Seems like pretty sticky situation to use. So people just started getting confused. And then when that Roman empress, when she started to get sick and ultimately died, the rumor mill stirred up again. It stirred up bad this time, and it said that her death was caused because of her sinful behavior. She was a fork user. If you are a fork user, you're going to die. That's basically what the story ends up stirring up to be, which is just absolutely crazy to me. But even though this rumor started stirring up and everyone's like, oh my gosh, we can't do this. Like, she died from it. She was using a fork. She's committing sinful behavior. It didn't stop the people because the fork was so convenient. So people just kept doing it despite their confusion. Now, I don't know for sure if people were actually using their forks in secret, but I could imagine that's something that probably ended up happening. If the church was saying back in, this was what, 1800s maybe? I don't know. Back in the day, if you were like really believing and thinking that the church was telling you something to do and your whole life, your whole government is run by the church, obviously you're not going to just sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to sit out in the front porch or the front, I don't know what they had then, on the front dirt. I wonder if did the peasants even have real houses? You're not going to sit on your front dirt and just start pulling out the fork and utensil and using it. I would probably assume that they were keeping it to themselves a little bit. So with the growing popularity of the forks, the Catholic Church decided to get involved, and they were like, whoa, this is vain. Using such an excessive delicacy, that's sinful. Now we are really putting the hammer down and saying, no forks. It's vain, it's outrageous, and it's absolutely unnecessary. We are not supporting this, which is really confusing, really confusing, because go back to the beginning of the story. The Romans were the ones who were first credited with bringing this out in the open, with encouraging these merchants to be selling them. And remember the Roman empress with the golden fork? But all of a sudden now the Catholic Church is pulling back and saying, I don't know, but it sounds like the British were coming. Maybe, just a thought. That's just my speculation. I don't really know. I just think it's hilarious to think about the fact that the Catholic Church wasn't into the whole fork thing, and the British weren't into the whole fork thing. And the Romans lost an empress because of the golden fork thing. It's just interesting how all this comes into play. So then when we get to the mid-1800s, the American colonies are starting to form and forks are being used big time. Imagine trying to build your entire township in your community. You're already having to fight all of the other issues like, we don't know where to go. What are these bugs? What is this plant life? We just got off of a ship. We barely made it without getting the scarlet fever or the black plague or whatever the heck was going on. And they just wanted to break. They're just trying to hang out and use their forks. And so this really stirred up a lot. What's really cool about this too is it is said that the American colonies starting to use this, they're actually the ones who began using the fork in the left hand when using a knife, okay? Now, if you're wrong-handed like me, life has been very good to us because for left-handed people, when you have a fork, you eat with your left hand a fork. You're taught growing up to do certain things with your right hand just because a lot of people who are teaching you how to do these things, they're right-handed. So a lot of left-handed people grow up learning to cut with a knife with their right hand. Doesn't mean we're very good at it, okay? I still need someone to cut my steak for me, I'm not gonna lie. But it is convenient to eat that way. But eating that way is more similar to a European type of eating and dining as far as the etiquette with cutlery and things. So you have a continental, way of eating. And then you have the American style. So left-handed people typically look like they're eating a continental type of way, which is in Europe and stuff. So you don't see people switching over their hands and stuff, because why would you do that? Just learn to use your left hand for cutting, I guess. But in the US, a lot of people, they do the swapsies. So the right-handed people will eat, then they'll swap over, pick up the knife, and then they'll swap over and eat. It just seems like a lot of unnecessary steps, and anytime I can advocate for left-handed people like myself, I'm going to, because southpaws should rule the world, just saying. But before we got to that point where American colonies were starting to use their left hand and right hand and switch back and forth while they're eating, what's really interesting is some people actually preferred not to use a knife at all, because it was just too much. The back and forth and what's comfortable and relearning basically how to eat as an adult was a little too wild and out there. So what they would do is literally spear the food with the fork and just eat it like an animal, like a caveman. Just use the fork as a stick. Spear, stabby stab, and then bite it off. There was also some people that tried to use this new multi-tool. Think of kind of like a Think of like a Swiss Army knife kind of contraption, but in one thing. So like you would have a fork, right? And then one of the prongs on the fork would actually be kind of like a knife. So you could use these things back and forth. Admiral Nelson was super famous for doing this, but he also only did have one arm. That might have had something to do with it. Just a guess. But how cool would that be if you had one arm and this was back in the day? So you could, really, like Captain Hook. Think of Captain Hook, but he had a little thing where he could just plug in and then fork, knife. Honestly, I feel like that's a great weapon too. They're onto something. They are onto something there. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me for another episode of Snack Break with Meg. I keep it short and sweet because I don't want to waste your time. I'm glad you got to learn more today about offensive forks. I know I really enjoyed it. If you like this, go look at the other videos or look it up on wherever you get your podcasts. You can go through and listen to every single episode, just the audio, or, get on here. Look me up on all social media. It's Megan Terry, and check out the blogs to see where did she get those sources from, meganterry.org. Thanks!